The night was cold on the edge of New Terra Colony. Neon signs flickered weakly in the heavy mist. People hurried past the narrow streets, their heads down, not sparing a glance for anyone who wasn't useful to them. In the middle of that rushing crowd, a small figure stood still, almost invisible. A young alien girl, her silver hair matted with dirt, her violet skin pale from hunger. Her name was Zira. Zira had once lived in a clean apartment filled with dreams and hopes. But dreams cost money, and Zira had none left. After losing her job, she failed to pay her rent. Her landlord, a cruel alien trader, had thrown her out without mercy. She had begged. She had cried. It didn't matter. In this city, weakness was punished. Now, Zira wore an old, torn cloak she had found in the garbage. Her thin hands shook as she clutched her empty stomach. It had been 3 days since she had eaten anything real. The tiny scraps from trash cans were not enough. She was starving. Across the street, she saw a small diner. Warm yellow light spilled onto the wet ground. Inside, humans and a few aliens sat at tables, laughing and eating steaming plates of food. The smell of cooked meat and baked bread drifted toward Zira, making her mouth water painfully. She knew she had no credits. She couldn't pay for anything. But hunger was a powerful thing. It whispered desperate ideas into her mind. Zira tightened her grip on her cloak and stepped toward the diner. Inside, nobody noticed the frail alien girl as she hesitantly pushed open the door. A bell above the entrance chimed, but the sound was drowned in the chatter and clinking of plates. Zira's bare feet made no sound on the floor as she moved toward a corner booth. There, sitting alone, was a human man. He looked different from the others. His clothes were plain, a little worn. His face was rough, with a few scars visible even in the soft light. But his eyes were kind. He slowly sipped from a cup of coffee, staring out the window as if lost in thought. Zira's heart raced. Her hands trembled with shame and fear, but she forced herself to walk closer. She stood silently next to his table for a moment. He finally looked up, frowning slightly in confusion. Before she could lose her nerve, Zira spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I will give you my body if you buy me a meal." For a moment there was silence. The man stared at her, stunned. Several nearby customers turned their heads, their faces filled with disgust or amusement. Someone even laughed cruelly from another table. Zira's cheeks burned with humiliation. She wanted to run. She hated herself for saying those words, but her body refused to move. Hunger chained her in place. The man slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes rattle. His voice was loud and angry, not at her, but at the whole room. "You don't have to sell yourself for food," he shouted. The diners fell silent. Eyes widened in surprise. Zira flinched, expecting him to lash out, to throw her out, to humiliate her even more. Instead, the man stood up, motioned to the waitress, and pointed to the biggest meal on the menu. "Bring her whatever she wants. Double portions," he said firmly. Then he turned to Zira, his voice softer now. "Sit down, you're not leaving until you've eaten properly." Zira blinked, not understanding. She had expected anger, cruelty, maybe even exploitation, not kindness. Hesitantly, she sat down across from him, her heart pounding. The waitress brought plates piled high with food. Zira stared at the feast in disbelief. Fresh bread, roasted meat, steamed vegetables. Her hands shook as she reached for the first piece of bread, stuffing it into her mouth so quickly she almost choked. The man pushed a glass of water toward her, and she drank it greedily. For the first time in weeks, her stomach began to feel warm, almost full. Tears welled in Zira's golden eyes, but she wiped them away quickly, embarrassed. The man didn't ask questions. He didn't stare at her like she was a freak. He just quietly watched, making sure she had enough to eat. Finally, after a long, painful silence, Zira dared to speak again. Why are you helping me?" The man leaned back in his chair, his rough hands clasped together. "Because no one else would," he said simply. In that moment, something inside Zira cracked, not in a painful way, but like a frozen river finally beginning to thaw. For the first time in a long, long while, she felt a tiny spark of hope. But deep inside her heart, fear still whispered, nothing good comes for free. There's always a price. She would have to find out what that price was, very soon. The plate in front of Zira was nearly empty now. Only a few crumbs remained. Her stomach, once screaming in pain, was finally quiet. Yet, her mind raced with confusion and fear. She kept waiting for the trap, the cruel laughter, the demand for payment. But none came. The human, this stranger, just sat there, sipping his coffee and watching the rain fall outside the diner. Zira gripped the edge of the table tightly. Her instincts screamed at her to run. No one gave anything for free. Not on this world, not to someone like her. Finally, unable to bear the tension, she stood up. "Thank you," she whispered, lowering her head. "I'll go now." The man turned his head, his sharp brown eyes locking onto her. His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "Go where?" he asked. Zira froze. She hadn't thought that far ahead. Back to the freezing streets? Back to hiding in alleys? Digging through trash? She didn't answer. The man stood up slowly, tossed some credits onto the table, and adjusted the old jacket on his shoulders. For a moment, Zira thought he was going to walk away. Instead, he said something that made her heart stop. "Come with me. You shouldn't be alone tonight." The entire diner seemed to hold its breath. Some of the customers exchanged glances. A few whispered under their breath. Zira heard words like idiot and fool tossed around. She even caught one alien woman smirking, as if already imagining the disaster waiting to happen. But the man didn't seem to care about any of them. Zira stared at him, suspicious. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. The man didn't blink. "Because nobody deserves to freeze to death just because they lost everything." There was no pity in his voice. No hidden promise, just simple truth. Still, Zira hesitated. Trust was a luxury she could not afford. She remembered the betrayal, the beatings, the cold looks of those who once called her a friend. She remembered sleeping under trash piles to avoid being seen. She remembered men who had offered her a place to stay before with ugly, greedy smiles. And yet this man was different. Maybe. Without realizing it, Zira's feet moved. She followed him out into the rain. The cold air slapped her immediately, but before she could shiver, he pulled off his jacket and threw it over her shoulders. It was rough, smelled faintly of soap and metal, but it was warm. Zira blinked up at him, too stunned to speak. He simply said, "My name's Eli." Zira hesitated, then murmured, "Zira." Eli led her through the dark streets, past closed shops and flickering streetlights. He didn't touch her. He didn't push her. He just walked a few steps ahead, like someone leading a lost animal home. They turned onto a quieter road. Zira's suspicion returned. She slowed down, looking around. No one was following them. No obvious traps. Still, when Eli stopped at a small, battered house with cracked walls and a broken fence, Zira's heart pounded. She clenched her fists under the jacket. Eli fished out a key, unlocked the door, and pushed it open. Warm light spilled out. Inside it was messy but clean. Wooden floors, a small couch, an old heater buzzing in the corner. Eli stepped inside and then paused. He didn't force her to enter. "You can stay here tonight," he said. "Just a room, food, and safety. That's all. No strings attached." Zira's throat tightened. No strings attached. The word sounded too good, too dangerous. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again, almost begging for the real reason. Eli smiled sadly. "Because once, someone saved me when I had nothing left. It's only right I pass it forward." Zira stood, there shivering on the doorstep. Inside was warmth, safety, maybe hope. Outside was the cold, the hunger, the darkness that wanted to swallow her whole. Her legs moved before her mind did. She stepped inside. As Eli gently closed the door behind her, Zaira didn't know yet that this small decision would change everything, her future, her heart, her very soul. But for tonight, she was no longer alone. The old door creaked shut behind Zaira with a soft click. She stood frozen in the entryway, her bare feet sinking into the worn carpet. The air inside was heavy with the scent of something strange yet comforting, soap, old books, and a hint of metal oil. Eli dropped his bag by the couch and moved toward a small heater, fiddling with the controls. The buzz grew louder and a warm wave of air began to fill the room. He didn't look at her. He didn't rush her. He acted like she was invisible, and somehow that made Zaira more nervous than if he had stared. This couldn't be real. People didn't just help others without a reason. They didn't give without taking more. Tightening the jacket around her thin body, Zaira stood silently, her mind racing. Should she run? Was this a trap? Maybe he was just waiting for the right moment. Eli finally spoke, his voice steady but gentle. There's a spare room down the hall. It's not fancy, but it's clean. You can sleep there tonight. Zaira said nothing. Her throat felt dry and tight. Seeing her hesitation, Eli raised his hands, palms open like a man trying to calm a wounded animal. No one will touch you here, he said simply. You're safe. Safe. The word felt so heavy, so alien, that Zaira almost laughed. Safe? What did that even mean anymore? Still, her body moved before her mind could stop it. She followed him down a narrow hallway, past a small kitchen, and an even smaller bathroom. He stopped at a door, pushed it open, and stepped aside. Inside was a tiny room, a narrow bed with a worn blanket, a cracked window, and a small cabinet. Nothing fancy, but to Zaira, it looked like a palace. For a moment, she just stared, her heart pounding. Then she whispered, I'll pay you back, I'll work, I'll clean, I'll do anything. Eli shook his head. No payment, no conditions, just rest. Zaira felt her hands tremble. She wasn't used to this. Deals always had a price. Always. Eli seemed to read her thoughts. He leaned against the wall and said, You stay as long as you need. No deals, no bargains, only one rule. Zaira tensed, waiting for the hidden demand. You eat properly, and you stay safe. That's it. She blinked. That was all? No hidden traps, no secret demands? Eli yawned and rubbed his face tiredly. You've been through enough. You don't owe me anything. He gave her a small nod and turned to leave, pausing just once at the door. Good night, Zaira. Then he walked away, leaving her standing alone in the tiny room. Zaira sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. The blanket scratched against her fingers, but it was warm. The pillow smelled faintly of clean cotton. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapped the blanket around herself, and stared out the cracked window into the darkness outside. It started to rain again. Tiny drops tapped against the glass, soft and steady. For the first time in months, she wasn't cold. For the first time in months, no one was shouting at her, chasing her, using her. Tears welled in Zaira's golden eyes, and this time she didn't fight them. Silent sobs shook her thin body as she buried her face into the blanket. She had survived so much. She had fought for every breath, every scrap, every miserable second. And now, someone had given her shelter not because they wanted something, but because they could. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Terrifying. Beautiful. Dangerous. But deep down, Zaira made a silent promise to herself. I will not waste this chance. As she closed her eyes, letting sleep claim her fragile body, Zaira didn't know what the next day would bring. But for tonight, at least, she was home. Even if just for a little while. The first light of morning crept through the cracked window, casting a soft golden glow across the small room. Zaira opened her eyes slowly, the unfamiliar feeling of warmth and softness wrapping around her like a fragile dream. For a few precious seconds she forgot where she was. Then reality crashed back. She sat up quickly, clutching the blanket to her chest. Her heart pounded with the old familiar fear of traps, of betrayal, of hidden dangers lurking behind smiles. She scanned the room. Nothing had changed. No locked doors, no chains, only silence. Her thin fingers gripped the edge of the bed. This couldn't be real. Kindness always had a price. She knew that. She had learned it the hard way. The jacket Eli had given her still hung from the chair. On a small table beside the bed, someone, him, had placed a plate of fresh bread, a cup of water, and a folded towel. No notes, no demands, just care. Zaira stared at the food suspiciously. Why? She whispered to the empty room. What does he want from me? The old fear gnawed at her. She couldn't let her guard down. She had made that mistake before, and paid for it in blood and broken trust. Slowly, Zaira slipped out of bed. She moved quietly, barefoot, listening for any sound. Eli was nowhere to be seen. His boots and jacket were gone from the front door. Out. Working, maybe. It was her chance. If this was a trick, she needed to find out before it was too late. With careful steps, Zaira crept through the small house. The floor creaked under her weight, but she didn't stop. She opened cabinets, checked behind doors, peeked under the couch cushions. No hidden weapons, no cages, no chains. Only worn furniture, old clothes, a few half-broken gadgets. In the corner of the living room, she found a battered wooden desk. Papers were scattered across it. Blueprints. Bills. Letters. Her hands trembled as she picked one up. It was a notice. Eli Grant. Overdue payment. Another letter showed a rejection from a company. Application denied. Zaira's eyes widened slowly. Eli wasn't rich. He wasn't powerful. He wasn't looking for slaves. He was struggling, just like her. The front door creaked suddenly and Zaira spun around, heart hammering against her ribs. Eli stepped inside, a bag of supplies in one hand. He froze when he saw her standing there, clutching the letter in her hand. For a long, terrible moment, they stared at each other. Eli's eyes darkened with hurt. Not anger, not rage, but a sadness, so deep Zaira felt it pierce through her armor. He set the bag down carefully and spoke, his voice low. You were looking for the catch, weren't you? Zaira swallowed hard. She couldn't deny it. She couldn't lie. She had been searching for proof that he was just like the others. Instead, she had found a man barely holding his own life together, who had still chosen to help her anyway. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them. Falda Eli rubbed a hand through his messy hair and gave a bitter chuckle. Guess I can't blame you. He walked past her, moving toward the small kitchen. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He just moved slower, like something inside him had cracked. Zaira stood there, frozen in shame. For the first time, she realized how deep her own scars ran, how they twisted even kindness into suspicion. She had been ready to run, ready to fight, but she hadn't been ready to believe. Zaira tightened her fists and forced herself to speak. I'm sorry, she whispered, voice trembling. Eli glanced back at her, his expression tired but soft. Eat something, he said simply. You'll feel better. Then he turned away, giving her space. No lectures, no guilt trips, only quiet forgiveness. Zaira sank down onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. Maybe trust wasn't about never being hurt. Maybe it was about giving someone the chance to prove they wouldn't. And maybe, just maybe, this broken human and this broken alien could help each other heal if she found the courage to stay. Outside, the rain had stopped. Inside, for the first time in her shattered memory, Zaira felt the first fragile thread of trust begin to weave itself into her heart. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the heater. Zaira sat curled up on the old couch, a blanket draped around her thin shoulders. She stared at the steaming bowl of soup in her hands, feeling its warmth seep slowly into her frozen fingers. Eli moved around the small kitchen, fixing a second bowl for himself. He didn't talk much. He didn't force her to explain her actions. He just existed beside her, steady, quiet, like a wall against the chaos outside. It was strange. It was terrifying. It was safe. For the first time in years, Zaira began to let her guard down, just a little. But safety, she would soon learn, was never permanent. A loud crash shattered the calm. The front door burst open with a violent kick, slamming against the wall. Cold air and rain spilled inside. Shadows filled the doorway. 3 rough-looking aliens, muscles bulging under ragged jackets, tattoos glowing faintly on their arms. Zaira's blood turned to ice. She knew them. Debt collectors, bounty hunters. The scum who fed on the weak and desperate. Their leader, a towering brute with black eyes, sneered when he spotted Zaira frozen on the couch. "There you are, little rat," he growled. "Thought you could hide?" Zaira's body reacted before her mind did. She scrambled backward, dropping the bowl, the soup spilling across the floor. She pressed herself against the far wall, heart hammering, in terror. The thugs stepped into the house, mud dripping from their boots. The leader pointed a thick finger at Zaira. "You owe. You pay. Tonight." Zaira shook her head wildly. "I have nothing, please." One of the thugs chuckled darkly. "Good. Then we'll just take you instead." They moved forward, but before they could reach her, Eli stepped between them. No hesitation, no fear. Just a man standing against giants. "Leave," Eli said, his voice like iron. The thugs laughed. "Move, human, this ain't your business." Eli didn't move. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he dropped into a low, steady stance. One hand slightly raised, the other curled into a tight fist. His eyes, once warm and tired, now burned with cold fire. "You have 5 seconds," he said quietly, "to walk away." The leader snarled and swung a heavy fist at him. Eli ducked under the blow like water slipping past stone. His counterattack was fast, brutal, a sharp strike to the thug's ribs that sent him staggering back, gasping for air. The others roared and charged. The living room exploded into chaos. Zaira watched, frozen in shock, as Eli fought like a storm, unleashed. Every move was precise, controlled. He didn't fight wildly, he fought smart, using their size against them. Tripping, dodging, striking with fierce bone-cracking blows. One thug went down with a broken arm. Another crashed into the old coffee table, groaning in pain. The leader, wheezing, finally pulled out a small shock blade, its tip crackling with deadly energy. Zaira screamed. But Eli didn't back down. With a quick, brutal move, he kicked the weapon from the thug's hand and slammed him into the wall with a force that shook the entire house. The thugs, battered and beaten, scrambled to their feet and fled into the rain, cursing and limping. The door swung open and shut in the wind. Then silence. Heavy, trembling silence. Eli stood in the middle of the ruined room, his chest rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. A small cut bled above his eyebrow, but he barely seemed to notice. Slowly, he turned to Zaira. Their eyes met across the wreckage. Zaira's heart raced. She had seen many kinds of strength before, violent, cruel, selfish. But this was different. This was strength used not to hurt but to protect. This was a strength that chose kindness even when kindness was hard. She rose to her feet, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. For the first time, she didn't see Eli as just a stranger who had offered her food and shelter. She saw him as something far rarer, a shield, a protector, a true ally. Zaira stumbled forward, her knees weak, and whispered, "Thank you." Eli wiped the blood from his brow and gave her a small, tired smile. "Next time," he said, voice rough but warm, "let's bolt the door properly." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Zaira laughed. It was a small, broken sound, but it was real. In that wrecked living room, surrounded by broken furniture and shattered fear, Zaira realized something powerful. Maybe survival wasn't just about running. maybe survival, was about finding someone strong enough to stand with you and never letting go. The rain had stopped by morning, but inside the small house the storm had left its mark. Broken chairs, shattered plates, muddy footprints across the floor. It looked like a battlefield. Zira sat at the edge of the couch, still wrapped in the blanket Eli had tossed over her after the fight. Her fingers traced the faded fabric absent-mindedly, mind lost in thought. Eli moved around quietly, picking up the mess. His knuckles were bruised, a thin cut traced along his cheekbone, but he worked without complaint. He didn't ask Zira to help. He didn't blame her for the chaos, he just cleaned. Zira tightened the blanket around herself, guilt gnawing at her heart. Because of her, his home had been invaded. Because of her, he had gotten hurt. And still, he stayed. Finally, Zira couldn't take the silence anymore. "I'm sorry," she said in a small voice, staring down at her hands. "I brought this trouble to your door." Eli paused, a broken lamp in his hands. He looked at her, really looked. His gaze steady, without anger, without judgment. "Zira," he said quietly, "you didn't bring trouble. Trouble was already out there. It just found someone who wasn't willing to turn away this time." Her chest tightened painfully. How could he still be kind after everything? Eli dropped the broken lamp into a trash bag and walked over to sit across from her. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, voice low and rough. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "Not your fear, not your shame, and definitely not your guilt." Zira shook her head desperately. "But I do. You saved me. You fed me. You fought for me. And I just brought danger into your life." Eli smiled faintly, a smile filled with tired understanding. "Maybe, but life's dangerous anyway." He shrugged. "I'd rather fight for someone who deserves a second chance than live safe and empty." His words hit her harder than any punch she had ever taken. Zira's throat burned. She wiped her eyes quickly, pretending it was dust from the broken furniture. They sat there in silence for a long time. Two broken souls. Two survivors. Slowly, Zira reached out. She placed her trembling hand over Eli's bruised one. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. Eli didn't flinch, he didn't pull away. He just squeezed her hand gently, like a promise made without words. A promise that said, "I'm not going anywhere." The hours drifted by. Later, Zira found herself sitting at the tiny kitchen table, laughing quietly as Eli tried, and failed, to cook something edible from what little food they had left. He cursed under his breath and she giggled behind her hand. It wasn't much. Burnt eggs, a dented pan, a kitchen filled with smoke. But to Zira, it felt like family. Real family. Not the one that abandoned her when she failed. Not the fake smiles and empty promises. A real bond, built from broken pieces and stubborn hope. That night, as Zira lay in her small bed, listening to the gentle creaks of the house settling around her, she made another silent vow. "I will not run anymore. I will protect this place. I will protect him, just like he protected me." Some bonds were formed by blood, some by duty, but the strongest bonds, the ones that truly lasted, were born from shared pain, shared hope, and the courage to believe again. Zira didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe more trouble, maybe more battles. But now she knew one thing for sure: she wouldn't face it alone, not anymore. The days turned into weeks. The small broken house slowly changed, not because of money, not because of magic, but because two souls who had nothing began to build something. Zira worked quietly at first, fixing broken furniture, patching old clothes, cooking simple meals that even Eli could barely mess up. She was clumsy. She made mistakes. But every little thing she did filled the empty house with something new. Life. Eli found work too. Nothing grand. Fixing broken machines in a scrapyard, hauling cargo, hard work for little pay. But every evening, he came home. And every evening, Zira was there, waiting, smiling shyly, a meal ready, even if sometimes burnt. It wasn't easy. Sometimes Zira woke up screaming from nightmares of the street. Sometimes Eli came home with bruises from jobs gone wrong. But every time they faced it together, and slowly, without even noticing, they built more than just shelter. They built a home. One crisp evening, Zira stood outside the little house, breathing in the cold, clean air. The stars blinked above like tiny promises. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling stronger than she ever had before. She wasn't the broken, starving girl who had once offered her body for a meal. She wasn't the abandoned, fearful creature hiding from every shadow. She was Zira, and she was still standing. Eli stepped outside, 2 mugs of steaming tea in his hands. He handed one to her with a small smile. They stood together in silence, watching the stars. After a long while, Zira spoke, her voice soft. "Why did you help me that night?" Eli thought for a moment, then said simply, "Because someone once looked at me the way you looked at that food, desperate, lost, and someone reached out their hand. It saved me." He sipped his tea and added, "I just figured maybe it was my turn to be the hand reaching out." Zira's chest ached, not from pain, but from something far deeper. Hope, gratitude, maybe even love. She set her mug down carefully and faced him. "You didn't just save me," she said. "You taught me how to save myself." Eli smiled, and for the first time in a long, hard life, it reached all the way to his eyes. Zira took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill her lungs, then let it out slowly. "I want to stay," she said. "I want to build something here. With you." Eli looked at her silent for a moment, then he nodded. No big speeches, no grand promises, just understanding. And that was enough. Months later, when people in town spoke of the battered old house at the edge of the colony, they didn't call it broken anymore. They called it alive. They spoke of the strange but strong pair who lived there, a human man and a silver-haired alien woman, who worked side by side, who stood up for the weak, who never turned anyone away hungry. Some said they were fools. Some said they were heroes. But those who had once laughed now watched in silent awe. Because sometimes the ones the world calls broken are simply the ones strong enough to rebuild from nothing. And Zira, she didn't just survive. She became something beautiful. All because once, in her darkest hour, someone had looked past the dirt, the fear, the mistakes, and seen the soul still shining underneath.